Thank you for being here for our Revelation One-Day Seminar. We are thrilled and blessed to have Dr. John Pauline here. I have known of him for a long time. He is a pastor in New York, so even now, though he is the dean of a school of religion, he has a pastor's heart and speaks as a pastor, and what he reads and studies, it's for the church and to make a difference in the world. Speaks all over the world. We are lucky to have him for a whole day here today. So one message already this morning, and then one now, and then two this afternoon. So I just picked out a few of the books from my library as quick as I could go through them. He's written many more than this. He's had a theme and a passion for the last days, and the truth for the end time is maybe one of the first ones I read. Several on Revelation, but there is a Revelation commentary coming, right? How long are we going to wait for this? 8 chapters done. So the clock is ticking. We need this. How can Jesus come until your commentary is done? We have a little TV show that we do together. It's called GPS, if you ever get it, from LOBN. And so I ask some of the questions, and then he and Sarah answer all the questions. And Tony has come a few times. We have some others. So every few weeks we go to Loma Linda, and we spend 2-3 hours and tape some shows. And we're just thrilled that he can be here with us today. But Pastor Sarah has been part of the family for a long time, so I said, Sarah, you come and introduce him the final introduction.
So, poor guy has to have me introduce him twice. I have grown up calling him Uncle John. He is my dad's college roommate, so I don't know how much further back they could go. They hung out in New York. They did all sorts of shenanigans that I grew up hearing these epic tales about and then told, don't ever do those, you know? And I'm like, you can't tell me these amazing practical jokes you guys have done and then tell me I can't do them. But these guys are out of control. They were college roommates. And whenever we would travel, you guys know I grew up overseas, and every time we'd come to the U.S., I just always knew there was one home we would be in, at least for some time. And it was always nice to know that we had a home in the U.S. And so Uncle John and Aunt Pamela and their kids, Tammy and I, looked very similar when we were younger, and so we would always get mixed up when we would go places together. His daughter, Kimberly, you guys have gotten to meet a couple times. She's come up here to do some announcements because she's a health nerd. But Uncle John is one of those people that is just absolutely phenomenal because you can ask him anything. And as someone who always questions everything and wants to know and doesn't truly buy into everything all the time, it's really nice to know I have someone in my life and someone that is so educated with multiple degrees that I can be so dumb question, but, and he actually answers them, and he takes time to explain to me why, and he encourages me in ministry. And so I just am so excited to have my dear Uncle John here today to present some stuff that maybe I never really fully understand. So Dr. John Pauline, please come to your space.
Introductions don't get much better than that, so we will accept that. This is the second part of a series that we're doing today. The first part of the series we did in the first service, and that was entitled, well, maybe I won't tell you, but I think you can see it online later if you'd like. Anyway, our topic here is the last Sabbath. And based on what was shared this morning, a basic reality of the book of Revelation is that there will be an end-time deception. In the first service, we talked about it, and that was something we need to be aware of and prepare for. But there was one thing that we didn't clarify this morning, and that is exactly what the central issue is. If there's going to be a deception at the end of time, if what people see and hear and touch is not going to be reality, is there some clue? Is there some way that we can get a sense of which side is the right side to be on? If there are powers out there claiming to be God, how do we know which side we should be on? If you have God against God and gospel against gospel and so forth, how are you going to know which side to be on? Well, there's a basic principle in Revelation that helps us dig below the surface. And we're going to be sharing on that together this morning. And that is that the book of Revelation is based on the Old Testament. That if you understand the Old Testament, if you've studied it and read it, Revelation isn't nearly as hard as you thought it was. It's full of language, places, names, people that are familiar from the Old Testament. But there is a problem with all that. The book of Revelation never quotes the Old Testament. It never sits down and says, Isaiah 11:22. Okay, here's what we're talking about. Doesn't do that. Instead, it alludes to the Old Testament. A word here, a phrase there, sometimes just the barest of hints. So when you're trying to understand the book of Revelation, the basic strategy you need to use is to try to figure out, what is this connecting to? And you can start with Bible margins. Everybody know what a Bible margin is? That's sometimes in Bibles, it'll have a little margin and it'll give you texts, Old Testament texts, New Testament texts that are parallel to the text you're looking at. Now, some of those suggestions are really, really good, some of them not so good. But you start with that. Maybe a Bible commentary says, well, you should look into Genesis here. Or perhaps, as it says, you can use a concordance as well. All right, so the question then is, what do you do with this information? And it says, look for verbal, thematic, and structural parallels. Now, this is not going to be on the test, okay, so don't worry about that. But just remember those. We'll go into that later, and it'll all make sense. But you start with suggestions that other people have made, and then you compare. You take Revelation on the one hand, you take the Old Testament text on the other, you compare them, and you look for words and ideas and structures that would indicate that John must have had that in mind when he was looking at this vision and when he was writing it down. And then the big question is, was John pointing us to the Old Testament? Or was he just using the language as an echo? You know, sometimes we simply echo things and don't even realize we're doing it. And I'm going to date myself, but some of you may remember the presidential election in 1984. That's before some of you were born. I know that. But there was a very special presidential debate. All right? And in the debate, one candidate was making tremendous claims. I'm going to do all these fantastic things. Maybe sounds like somebody you know. I'm going to do all these incredible things. And the other candidate said, I have only one question for you. Where's the beef? Remember that? Some of you? All right. Now that doesn't make any sense off the top. It's kind of like, what kind of answer is that? Where's the beef? What does that have to do with anything? Well, back then there was a TV commercial for hamburgers. And there's this little old lady, and she gets the hamburger presented. There's this big old bun, and she takes the top off. There's a little tiny little piece of meat in there. And in a quavering 85-year-old voice, she says, where's the beef? And the whole idea is you can talk all you want, but if the sandwich isn't real, it isn't worth anything. That comment changed the whole election around, and in the favor of the candidate who said that. That's the power of illusion. It is because he was able to take the situation, allude to that commercial that everybody was familiar with, and suddenly the power of that action was way, way bigger than if he had simply said, I don't believe you. Or if he said, well, you talk a lot, but where's the action? It would make the point, but it wouldn't have the power. Revelation's power is grounded in its illusions. And sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes it's accidental. And knowing the difference is really important. All right. So, you apply those insights to Revelation. Let me give you an example. All right, and the example is from Revelation 13, 1 and 2. That's something we mentioned this morning. So it says, I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon his horns 10 royal crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. The beast I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like a bear, his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. All right, John is alluding to the Old Testament here. Anybody see it? Where's that? Daniel chapter 7. Okay, I didn't give you a hard one. All right, this is not a hard one because I want you to see the principles. All right, Daniel chapter 7, you notice there it lights up blue and white letters. All right, first of all, a beast coming up out of the sea. That happens in Daniel 7. There's a beast in Daniel 7 that's a leopard, another one's a bear, another one's a lion. What's the author doing here? He's creating a composite beast. What he sees in his vision combines features of Daniel 7. There's 4 beasts in Daniel 7. There's only one here, and it kind of combines them all. Now in Daniel 7, he's describing 4 animals. First of all, you have a lion. And then you have a bear. And then you have a leopard. And then, I don't know, what do you call that last one? It doesn't look like anything in nature. So we'll just call it Mr. Bizarre. All right? Really, really weird animal. Okay? So Daniel has these 4 animals that he's describing. Okay? Now, the lion has 1 head, as you would expect. The bear also has 1 head. The leopard, this is where things start going weird. 4 heads. Have you seen a 4-headed leopard lately? I hope you haven't. Okay? People sometimes see those on substances. Anyway, the bizarre beast is not bizarre in that it has only 1 head. Now, here's the interesting thing. Do the math. How many heads do you have? 7 heads. The 4 beasts of Daniel 7 have 7 heads. And you say, why are you telling me this? Go back and think horns. How many horns does a lion have in Daniel 7? No horns. Bear? No horns. 4-headed leopard? No horns. Mr. Bizarre? 10 horns. Okay, let's do the math. The 4 beasts of Daniel 7 have a total of 10 horns. Are you beginning to see what's happening in Revelation 13? You have a beast coming up out of the sea. It looks like a leopard, bear, and a lion, and it has 7 heads and 10 horns. So this beast in Revelation 13 is putting all the features of the beasts in Daniel 7 together. That's called illusion. Put them side by side. Coming out of the sea, lion, bear, leopard, 7 heads, 10 horns. That's what we call a structural parallel. It's when a writer in one place is building on the structure somewhere else. So in Revelation 13, the evidence is clear. I mean, people were calling it out as soon as I asked, right? We all kind of know that if we've ever read Daniel 7 and ever read Revelation 13. The two are obvious. But what do you do when the evidence is not so clear? And that is often the case in the book of Revelation. A reason the book of Revelation is so hard for people to understand is sometimes the real story isn't on the surface. Sometimes it's a little below the surface. Sometimes you have to dig a little. Now you say, that's too much work. Have your kids ever said, you told them study the Bible, and say, it's too much work? Nonsense. Kids love to work. You don't believe me? Watch them figure out a puzzle in a computer game. Is that work? Trying to get through a level in a computer game is a lot of work. Now, my daughter got me into Candy Crush. I don't know. Any addicts out there? Okay, I won't tell you how long it took me to get to 5, but anyway, you see, the whole idea there is you try to figure out how to solve that level. And what's your reward for solving that level? You move to a harder level. Go figure. These kids are working real hard. But the fascinating thing is that hard work doesn't seem hard because it's fun, right? Because it's fun. I want to tell you something. When you really get into the book of Revelation, when you really start looking at these illusions, it actually becomes fun. It becomes like one of these games because it's a puzzle in which you have so many things you don't understand, but little by little, connections start coming together. And you know what? When you figure out one thing in Revelation, it raises 10 questions you hadn't thought of. And that's like moving to another level. And I have to honestly tell you, studying Revelation can be as much fun as one can imagine. You may not believe that now, but you need to spend time with it. When you spend time with it and become familiar with it, that's when the fun really gets started. So, let's talk about how. All right, because a lot of people say, well, do this and it'll be good for you, but you don't know how. How do you study and understand something like the book of Revelation? I'd say look for 3 pieces of evidence, all right? I told you we'd come back to this. Verbal parallels, all right? So that's one piece. Thematic parallels, that's another piece. Structural parallels, that's another piece, all right? When you're comparing a text in Revelation with a text in Daniel or somewhere else, you need to compare those pieces. All right, what is a verbal parallel? By the way, I'm giving you a fun version of my doctoral dissertation. I hope you don't mind. All right, there's one thing I'm kind of known for out there. This would be it. All right, verbal parallels. Actually, there have been 5 dissertations written on this principle. That's really a great honor. You know, when people in places like Westminster Seminary or Harvard, or even in Germany, Heidelberg and stuff, when there's students there studying the method and applying it, that is one of the greatest honors I think any scholar could have. But let's do it for this audience today. What is a verbal parallel? Well, it's whenever there's 2 or more major words in common. You're comparing a text in Revelation and a text in the Old Testament. Do they have any words, big words in common? Not and the, but really, important words, big words, all right? The more, the better. In fact, if you have about 20 words in common, what would you call that? A quotation, right? I mean, then you know, there's no question. So you're trying to figure out, does an author want you to know this background text? The more words, the better. In Revelation, you have sea, lion, bear, leopard, heads, and horns. All right? So in Revelation 13, there are 6 major words in parallel with Daniel 7. Pretty cool. Thematic parallels, what is that? It's when there's a clear parallel of ideas between the 2 texts. By itself, this is the weakest evidence for an illusion. But in Revelation 13, you have animals coming up out of the sea and representing world powers. So that's a pretty strong theme. All right, structural parallels are when you have a number of words and themes in roughly the same order. And that's really strong evidence. So in Revelation 13, you have many words and themes. Not in exactly the same order, but clearly Daniel 7 is constantly in view in the book of Revelation. It's in view in chapter 1, in chapter 4, in chapter 5, in chapter 12, in chapter 13, in chapter 17. You find echoes of Daniel 7 all the way through. So it's no question that John knows Daniel 7, and he wants you to be thinking about it as he writes this amazing vision. All right, so there you have it. Revelation 13, Daniel 7, no question. Very strong parallels. All right, so now let's get to the study for this morning. Revelation 12:17. It tells us that the dragon was angry with the woman, and he went away to make war with the remnant of her seed, those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. So in this text, you have a summary in advance of the next two chapters. You have a dragon against the remnant. And in chapter 13, it describes the dragon's war. In chapter 14, it describes the remnant's response. So this morning, we talked about chapter 13 in the first service, and a little bit how that connects with all of this. Now we want to look at chapter 14, because in this final battle, it uses military language, but in the book of Revelation, it's not about military stuff. It can talk about wars and battles, but it's not about tanks and planes and guns. Battle of Armageddon is not a battle with tanks and planes and guns. It's a battle for the mind. It's a war of words. And so in the book of Revelation, military language is a way of expressing something, but the actual battle itself is on a different plane, a different level. How will the dragon attack people? With deception and with powerful words. And how do the people respond? In Revelation 13, we saw this morning there's a counterfeit trinity. You have a dragon and a sea beast and a land beast that are counter to the true God. That's what the deception is all about. You have a counterfeit trinity claiming to be the true God, offering a counterfeit gospel. And you see in Revelation 13 that this unholy trinity desires to attack and destroy God's remnant people. And by the way, folks, this afternoon, just to let you know, we're going to have 2 sessions this afternoon on the remnant. It's one of the most controversial topics within Adventism today, trying to understand where do Adventists locate in the wider Christian world? Where do Adventists locate in the wider world itself? Is it an arrogant position? Are we claiming more than we ought to claim? The first session this afternoon is going to look at what the Bible has to say about the remnant. And then in the second session, we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty issues of today's world. If God has called the Adventist people with a unique message, what do we have to say to today's world? What do we have to say to the war between Islam and Christianity in today's world? Has God sent us to say something significant in today's world, or is this a message that made more sense 150 years ago? We're going to tackle some of those tough questions, and I dare suggest you may be surprised by some of the answers. So that's just a little commercial for this afternoon when we talk about the remnant. But right now the question is, how can the remnant, how can people who want to be faithful to God in today's world, how can they know this deception has arrived? Is there some kind of marker that you can look for that will prepare you for that time? Oops, just heading backwards there, sorry. All right, let's go to Revelation 14, verse 7, because it's at the heart of what we call the 3 angels' messages. And the first angel's message is the core of the message that Adventists have been given for the world. Fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment has come, and worship Him who made heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountain of waters. This is the last gospel message to the world. We don't have time to go into all of it. Fear God doesn't mean to tremble with fear. It means to respect and honor God, to take Him seriously. Giving glory to Him has a number of powerful and important implications. The hour of judgment is one that we could talk about another time, but the crucial one here is worship Him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. If you have a counterfeit concept of God and a true concept of God, but the two are in clash, how do you know which one is speaking for the true God? How can you tell the difference between the truth and the counterfeit? The key is worship. But how do you know who to worship? You've got more than 1,000 denominations in North America alone. You have many, many religions aside from Christianity that are followed by millions of people. How do you know where the truth lies at a time of deception? Revelation 13 and 14 leave us in no doubt. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. They worshiped the beast. The final battle is a battle not with tanks and planes and guns. It's a battle over worship. And in that final battle, there'll be people worshiping the dragon and worshiping the beast from the sea. Everyone who lives on the earth will worship him. Revelation 13:12, he will cause the earth and those who live in it to worship the first beast. Verse 15, in order that the image of the beast might speak and cause anyone who does not worship the image of the beast to be killed. In fact, in Revelation 14:9 again it says, if anyone worships the beast and his image, those who worship the beast and his image. So you see that in this final conflict, Revelation 13 and 14, the issue resides over worship. Now notice that every one of these texts that refer to worship refers to worshiping the dragon, worshiping the beast, worshiping the image of the beast. Do you notice how many times the word worship appears? 7 times. That's the most popular number in Revelation. That's the most crucial number in the book of Revelation. It's the number of completion and perfection. As I mentioned this morning, in the last days of Earth's history, things will not be as they seem. People will see a manifestation of God's power like they've never seen before in history. And it'll be a counterfeit. And they will worship the counterfeit. That's the story of Revelation. The issue in the final crisis of Earth's history is clearly worship. 7-fold mention. 7 times in Revelation 13 and 14, there's a call to worship the dragon, the beast, or his image. Only once in these chapters is a call to worship God. What does that tell you? It tells you that this text, wherever that is probably the most important text in the book, giving you the decisive information. Worship him who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. If this is the only call to worship the true God in this section, there's 7 times it talks about worshiping the counterfeit. This must be the central text of Revelation 13 and 14, the central text of the final battle. Yes, the central text of the entire book of Revelation. Here's where we discover something interesting. It says, worship him who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. Does that remind you of anything? Exodus 20. And verse 11 says, "In 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day." Here's the amazing thing that the Seventh-day Adventist pioneers discovered. You see, the core of the Adventist prophetic message is not what it is because people made it up. The Adventist pioneers studied the book of Revelation with great care, discovered that it had a significant message, and then said, I think we ought to align ourselves with that message. If the message of Revelation, we're going to look at it very carefully this afternoon as well, if the message of Revelation sounds like Adventist theology, it's because Adventists got their theology from Revelation, not the other way around. And so if Revelation is truly a book from Jesus, and if it's truly particularly of value at the end of time, we need to take it seriously. At the heart of Revelation, at the very moment of the decisive text comes along, there's an allusion, I believe, to the fourth commandment. And that, I think, would be significant. The ideal response to God's final call to worship is a call to remember the Sabbath day. In the final crisis of Earth's history, at a time of great deception, God's people will recognize where the truth is and where the counterfeit is by how they relate to the day of worship. Now, people may wonder, what an arbitrary kind of a thing. I mean, there's no difference between Saturday and Sunday. The sun shines on each day, the rain falls on each day. Astronauts going around the earth won't see any difference in those days. Why make that an issue? Evidently, it is a very important matter because it's embedded right in this crucial text. And we'll come back to that question at the end. But you know, I published this in a scholarly publication and got a protest. There were people out there that said, you didn't do your homework. You didn't notice that Revelation 14 isn't alluding to the fourth commandment, it's alluding to Psalm 146. Whole different story. That's the beautiful thing about scholarship. Fritz Guy, who teaches at La Sierra, once told me in class when he was at the seminary, he said, scholarship is kind of like running something up a flagpole to see if anybody salutes. And one of the beautiful things about scholarship is you can say all the stupid things you want, someone will correct it eventually. And so scholarship is kind of self-correcting. There are stupid things that can be said, but other scholars will correct it and get good publications that way. So they love to do that. And it kind of makes sure that the truth comes out. You know, I can claim anything I want about Revelation 14. But when you're part of a community of scholars, many of which are Roman Catholic, many of which are Jewish, many of which are other Protestant faiths, many of which are atheists even, you can't just talk nonsense. It's got to make sense. You got to be able to put two and two together. And so a protest arose. Revelation 14:7, really? Alluding to the fourth commandment? Are you serious? Psalm 146:6 has exactly the same language as Revelation 14. Now remember what I said? When you're dealing with illusions, what do you do when it's not so clear? Let's get into this one, because this is really important to us as Seventh-day Adventists. It's true. I have to tell you. Psalm 146:6 has the same phrase as Exodus 20:11. In fact, it is probably alluding to Exodus 20 itself. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. Psalm 146, the maker of heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them. So these are parallel texts. So who's John alluding to in Revelation? Exodus 20 or Psalm 146? Scholarly cases have been made both ways. You be the judge. Okay? You see how much fun this can be? Well, maybe you don't see it yet, but you will soon, all right? This can be fun because when you're dealing with smart people who know the Bible, you learn a lot of things. It's a very exciting process. All right, so let's compare. Revelation 14:7, worship him who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. Exodus 20, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. You can see the parallel there, right? But then comes Psalm 146, the maker of heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them. That's pretty close, isn't it? You notice the words in yellow, made heaven, earth, sea, made heavens, earth, sea, heaven, earth, sea, maker. All right, there's a lot of words in common there. About 4.5 words in common between Revelation 14 and Exodus 20, maybe 3.5 between Revelation 14 and Psalm 146. So, let's take a quick judgment here. The verbal parallels to both Old Testament passages are strong. All right? Actually, in the Greek, it wasn't clear in the English, the edge is towards Psalm 146:6. Because Revelation says, worship the one who made heaven, earth, and sea. Psalm 146 says, the maker of heaven, earth, and sea. What you don't realize, if you looked at it in the Greek, and I took it off the screen, okay, I don't want to mess up your heads with that stuff. But in the Greek, Psalm 146 and Revelation 14 are identical. And Exodus 20 is not. It's close, but it's not. Ouch. All right. So, in verbal parallels, there's kind of an edge towards Psalm 146:6. So this is the Super Bowl of Revelation scholarship. Is Exodus 20 going to be able to make a comeback? All right. Let's go to a second issue, and that is thematic parallels. In the context of Revelation 14, you have 3 sanctions. That's kind of like motivations, all right? And each of them comes from the 10 Commandments. You have the motivation of salvation in the 10 Commandments. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Therefore, obey these commandments. You have the motivation of judgment, visiting the iniquity of the fathers unto the children, 3rd and 4th generation. You have the motivation of creation. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth. So when you go to the Sabbath command, it's in the context of salvation, it's in the context of judgment, and the context of creation. So the 3 key themes in Revelation 14, 6, and 7 are echoed in the context of the Sabbath command. So when you look at thematic parallels, the connection between Revelation 14 and Exodus 20 is strong. I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who live on the earth, saying, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. So in Exodus 20, the call to come out of the house of bondage, the everlasting gospel, visiting the iniquity, hour of his judgment. In 6 days, him who made. You see, the words are not the same. You see that? The words are not the same, but there's parallel themes. The theme of salvation, the theme of judgment, and the theme of creation. So you have 3 themes in common between Revelation 14 and Exodus 20. Take that, Psalm 146. Oops. Those same 3 themes are also in Psalm 146. It talks about, do not put your trust in princes, in mortal men who cannot save. Blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob. There's salvation. The maker of heaven and earth, There's creation. He upholds the cause of the oppressed. There's judgment. So the same three themes that you found in Revelation 14 and in Exodus 20 are also in Psalm 146. So the thematic parallels to both Old Testament passages are again strong. But this time, I'd say there's a slight edge to Exodus 20. A slight edge to Exodus 20. The themes, I think, are a little tighter in the commandments than they were in Psalm 146. So basically, we're now at a tie. And the scholars of the world are holding their breath. There's one piece of evidence to go, and that is structural parallels. And structural parallels are really the strongest evidence in the end. Are there structural parallels between Revelation 14 and the Ten Commandments? First of all, it mentions the commandments of God. In Revelation 12:17 and 14:12, the commandments of God are mentioned. Worship. The first four commandments are all about our relationship to God, and they're about worship. And so you see in Revelation 13:4, 8, 12, 15, etc., multiple references to worship, which you'd expect if the first table of the Ten Commandments are in mind. And then it talks about worshiping the beast, worshiping his image, blasphemy, and the mark of the beast. If you're really keen on this stuff, you'll recognize worshiping the beast is a counterfeit of the first commandment. Worship God alone. Worshiping his image is a counterfeit of the second commandment. Don't worship graven images. Blasphemy is a counterfeit of the third commandment, which is, don't take the name of the Lord in vain. Mark of the beast is in contrast to the seal of God, which is the Sabbath. So the first four commandments are all alluded to in Revelation chapter 13 in the context of this whole final battle. So you have a massive structural parallel to the first four commandments in Exodus 20 throughout chapters 13 and 14. Is Psalm 146 crucial to Revelation 13 and 14 outside of that seeming quotation? The answer is no. Exodus 20 is clearly in John's mind as he marches his way through the book. Psalm 146 may be alluded to in Revelation 14:7, or it may simply be an echo of the language of the fourth commandment. So let's sum it up. In terms of verbal parallels, they're strong for Exodus 20, very strong for Psalm 146. In thematic parallels, they're very strong to Exodus 20, strong to Psalm 146. Structural parallels, very strong to Exodus 20, non-existent, Psalm 146. I would conclude that after careful study, it becomes clear what many other scholars outside this church have also seen, that when John comes to the crucial comment, he's alluding to the fourth commandment. He wants you to remember the Sabbath day. And I remember one of my closest colleagues who likes to call himself an atheist. I remember one day he had a couple glasses of wine and he got a bit sentimental and he says, let's go for a walk. And we took a long walk around the streets of Boston. And he was telling me about his life and so on, and then I wanted to tell him about this. And I went through some of this. And I said, what do you think of that? At that time, he was probably the world's most respected scholar on the book of Revelation. He said, actually, he says, I'm pretty sure John was a Sabbath keeper. He says, it makes sense in the light of the entire book. So you don't have to be a Seventh-day Adventist to see what I have just shared with you. It appears from the best of scholarship that at the heart of the book of Revelation is an appeal to worship God in a time of great deception at the end of time, and that appeal comes with a reminder of the seventh-day Sabbath, of the commandment. Now we got to come back to this. Does it make sense? You can't just say that. People need to know, why would God do this? Why does this matter so much? I mean, Saturday and Sunday are identical days scientifically. Doesn't rain more on one than the other. Sun doesn't shine more on one day than the other. Astronauts won't see any difference from outer space on one day or the other. Why would this be the decisive issue in the final crisis? It's a question we can't simply ignore. I'd like to make a few suggestions this morning that I think may be important for us to think about. First of all, the Sabbath points to creation. And what happened in creation? God created human beings for what purpose? To be in relationship to Himself. Today we know how vast the universe is. It's 13 billion light years across, and that's only what we can see. The God of that universe had something so special in mind for this couple in the garden that He wanted to be in personal, face-to-face relationship with them. He wanted to love them, and He wanted their love in return. What a God. Wanted their love in return. And in order to love God, we need to be free. No religious dogmatism, no ISIS, whether Muslim, Christian, or any other kind, telling people what they have to believe, telling people what they must do, telling them on pain of death to obey. That's not the God we worship. The Sabbath reminds us of a God who created us free so that we could willingly trust Him and be in relationship to Him. Sunday doesn't have that connection. Sunday is a very important day in every week. It's a day held dear to the hearts of many of my Christian brothers and sisters, and I honor them for being faithful to God to the best that they know. But Sunday doesn't point you to creation, and you can miss that whole message. It's also a pointer to salvation, because what Sabbath says, it's okay not to produce. It's okay to be here today and not be out there cranking out stuff or cranking out papers and ideas and systems and so on. It's okay not to produce. It is okay to take time and rest. It's okay not to work in order to be saved. Sabbath tells us all of that. It tells us it's all about God. Rest from your labors and let God do what God does. Human systems are constantly about we can do better. We can give you a job. We can give you more money. We can make your life great again. Okay? That's what human systems are trying to tell us. But Scripture tells us everything that matters is centered in God. And the Sabbath points to that salvation. First of all, in the Exodus story. Deuteronomy chapter 5, the Ten Commandments are repeated, but now it's not creation, it's the Exodus that is the ground for keeping the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath because I saved you from Egypt. I did what you could not do. I'm only asking you to trust me that I can do it again in your life today. It's a pointer to the cross. Because when Jesus said, "It is finished," He was echoing the words of Genesis 2. When God was done with His 6 days, He said, "It is finished," and He rested. And when Jesus on the cross said, "It is finished," He rested in the tomb on the Sabbath day. So Jesus honored the Sabbath even at the cross. And what the cross tells us is a beautiful picture of what God is like. Self-sacrificing love. A love that so respected the freedom of his creatures that he allowed them to nail him to a cross and did not resist. They made a choice. They acted on their choices. The consequences were horrific for God himself. And yet he so respected our freedom that he did not resist. He allowed that to happen. What a message. And the Sabbath, it connects so much with the Sabbath because the Sabbath is about letting God be God and not trying to save the world by crucifying this rebel. It's a pointer to the end of time because the Sabbath rest reminds us of what eternity will be like. The joy of relationship with God, the joy of not having to produce in order to survive. The Sabbath also points to the future. What a message. And finally, the Sabbath is a demonstration of our trust in God and in his word. The only reason to favor one day over another is because God has invited us. This is our date with God. He says, on this day, I want to be with you, special. It doesn't have to be obvious in science that this is a great day. It's a great day because I'm inviting you back into relationship with me. And those who recognize God's invitation, the Sabbath is their demonstration. We trust God. I don't know if Saturday's a better day than Sunday, but I trust that God knows. And I trust that God has all of this in mind, and that if I respond to him in this way, good things are going to happen. Does it make a difference? Does it make any sense? To me, it does. And may God grant that as we move into the final crisis of Earth's history, as we face deceptions like we have never faced before, that we will remember that ahead of time, in prophecy, God has given us all we need to be faithful and to be on his side when that time comes. And my prayer is that every one of us will be together on that day. God bless you.